So let me ask you, how many of you live on the other side of the Connecticut River? Oh, wow. A big number. So I'm pleased to announce that our next speaker hails from Norwich, Vermont, but also from Capitol Hill. He is your Congressman, Peter Welch. A lot about Peter in today's materials. Let me just read you one paragraph. Peter's solid record of accomplishments reflects his strong commitment to bringing people together to find real solutions to the difficult challenges facing our state and nation. In a climate of gridlock and partisanship, he has worked across the aisle in Congress to create jobs, make college and healthcare more affordable, balance the budget, increase energy efficiency, and end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and take care of our veterans. Peter has done a great job. We've gotten to know each other. He's particularly important to us today because he sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee and has been digging into these issues of energy for many, many years. Energy is a big focus of his work, and I've actually had the honor of working with Peter on a recent bill that would improve the way we finance renewable energy. That quote I gave you talked about working across the aisle, and this is truly an example of that. Peter has built a bridge to a conservative Republican from the oil patch of Texas named Ted Poe, and with some other members, they're moving a bill with strong bipartisan support in the House, strong bipartisan support in the Senate that may actually improve the way we finance renewable energy in this country. So without further ado, let me welcome Congressman Peter Welch.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. It's really wonderful to listen to engineers because engineers do things, solve problems. Science matters. I come from an alternative reality. Congress. It's kind of a fact-free zone, and you make your science up as you go along. And it's kind of it's nice to be invited. And I understand I can even stay for lunch if I want. And we've got like a 9% approval rating. So when I get an invitation, I'm coming. But Dan, I really do appreciate the work that you're doing, and I really do mean that about the engineers. I've gotten to have some appreciation for just how hard it is to address serious problems. How do you define it? How do you solve it? How do you get the resources? How do you implement it? How do you adjust when your theory isn't quite working out, and having a willingness to do that? And it's actually a kind of approach, empirical approach, that we need to have more of in Congress, where, in fact, there's just too much ideology, and that becomes a substitute for critical thinking in finding common ground. So having a conference with folks who have committed their lives to trying to find better solutions is really an important thing. And, in fact, a lot of the leadership in this country, with Congress being so stalled, is coming from communities of scholars, states, and others at the local level who are committed to a better future. So I appreciate being here. Dan wanted me to talk a little bit about nuclear policy and where it stands in Washington. The discussion in Washington, the mantra on energy is all of the above. And in fact, that's good rhetoric. It's really convenient for politicians to say that. And there's some merit to it. But bottom line, when I look back, I've been in this is my 8th year in Congress. When I look at what all of the above has translated into in terms of action, in real policy discussion, it's essentially been about a carbon-based energy policy. Nuclear has not received much attention. I'll give you the recent history of that in a minute. In energy efficiency, which is what I am a strong proponent of, is only beginning to get some serious attention. And one of the reasons it is because it doesn't get us into the debates about whether climate change exists or not. I mentioned I'm in Congress, and there's a lot of folks who don't believe in climate change. I work with some of the brightest minds of the 18th century. And we're not all there yet. We're working on it. But on efficiency, that's a place where there's a real potential for Republicans and Democrats to get together. You mentioned Ted Poe, another member, Corey Gardner from Colorado. He and I are doing some things, and what Ted Poe and I have in common, we say, you know, he's an oil guy, oil and gas from Texas, and Vermont is much more renewable in energy efficiency. We started the first energy efficiency utility in the country, and in fact, in Vermont, this is before the downturn, when the economy was really booming, Vermont was the first state to be load growth negative despite an upturn in economic activity. And that was because of the energy efficiency utility. But the thing that Ted Poe and I share is we're both cheap. And less is more. Whatever the fuel source, if you can use less of it, that's a good thing. And if you're going to do efficiency, it creates local jobs, because to do efficiency, it tends to be 95% of the products used in that are made in America. All of the labor is local labor, so that you're building a local economy. And of course, you're having long-term savings for the commercial or residential home that's been fixed. But we're here to talk about nuclear. And what's happened in nuclear has been something that has had this promise that potentially would reduce carbon emissions. And it got some interest by a lot of folks who are believers in climate change. And they saw that as a possible contributor to reducing carbon emissions. Some utilities have always been oriented towards large capital infrastructure projects, and nuclear certainly is that, and have advocated for it. But you know, the bottom line here on nuclear is that it's really expensive. I mean, aside from everything else, when you think about the fact that in 2005, that was the last big nuclear bill, the Energy Policy Act, you know, it established what no other industry has. I mean, it's really quite amazing when you think about it. It's tough out there in any industry, but in the nuclear industry, you got the production tax credit that's worth billions of dollars. You've got the standby support. So when the permit process bogs down, as it always will, then the burden of risk shifts to the taxpayer, and that's an immense expense. And then, of course, you have the loan guarantees, and they were renewed in the ARA bill, the stimulus bill. And those loan guarantees mean that if there is a failure on that loan, it's going to be the taxpayers that pick it up. I see a man's disagreeing with me, and you'd be able to get your question and your comment. But what I'm describing to you now is the reaction of a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. You've got the taxpayer on the hook for the loan guarantees, for the standby authority if the permit problems become really difficult, and you've got the taxpayer subsidy for the production tax credit. And this is in an industry that is theoretically mature, okay? And the whole issue about a tax credit, whether it's for solar or it's for nuclear, is always a hotly debated issue, because somebody is going to pay that. And you can have a debate, as you do in Congress, that there's some socially valuable reason why you should have a tax credit, where it's a production tax credit that goes to oil or to nuclear or to solar. But the bottom line is that that's not free. People have to pay it. So now you have this convergence in Congress where you have some folks who are questioning on the left and right whether, in the fiscal situation we're in, having the taxpayer on the hook for these risks is good public policy, whether we can afford it, whether we can do it. So what I'm suggesting to you is, if I'm a nuclear person, these are practical issues I've got to take a look at. I mean, what's the appetite for Congress, including a lot of Tea Party members, to have the taxpayer be at risk for the, in effect, subsidies that are absolutely essential to having any viable opportunity to proceed. Now, secondly, you asked that in the context where there's other factors that are starting to be very powerful, at least in Congress, when it comes to energy policy. And you've talked, I'm sure, earlier about gas. But, you know, the explosion in the production of gas a lot of people are heralding as just a huge economic advantage for this country. You know, I guess it's last year the United States marketed 24 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's up from 18 trillion in 2005. And a lot of the proponents of gas say there's much more out there. A lot of debates about how it's gotten, the fracking. I mean, those are not the topic of today's discussion. But the fact is that economic pressure is putting immense pressure on other forms of energy. So in Vermont, for instance, there's a big debate now about extending a gas pipeline down to Rutland, and a lot of the proponents of it see it as cheaper, cleaner fuel. And again, there's other issues about the fracking and what's the total net carbon reduction. But the bottom line is the cost to the consumer or to the business of natural gas is coming down. And in Vermont, of course, we just had Vermont Yankee Energy-owned facility decide to shut down, despite the fact that after a brutal court hearing, a court battle, and a promise to the Energy made promise to the state legislature that if the state legislature decided by their own vote not to continue the license, that they wouldn't. Energy went through the process of the court adjudication and got the ability to keep operating, but then made a decision based on their own economic analysis that it didn't make sense to keep an operating plant that they had permission to continue operating, to keep it going. So again, that's a sobering fact. And it's not lost on members of Congress. In other words, there is the promise that things are going to get better. There's the hope that we can have a nuclear industry for many that will produce clean fuel. But the facts on the ground are looking like that's out of reach. You know, how much money is it going to take of the taxpayer on standby authority? How much on the production tax credit? And then how much viability economically will a nuclear generator have when the cost of solar is less, or when the cost of wind is less, and the cost of gas is less, not solar. So those are real challenges, and as a practical matter, where you're seeing the energies of a lot of the pro-energy production members of Congress, and folks who I wouldn't say necessarily have it be oriented towards climate change outcomes, but what they see as an economic and competitive advantage for the U.S., cheap energy being what they regard as the most important policy consideration. Those folks are pushing hard on drilling, fracking, gas, and oil. That's really where a lot of that attention has been placed. So folks in the past in Congress who've been, I would say, pro-nuclear are stopping short. We're just not hearing much about it. That's the reality. You know, before I was in Congress in 2005, Congress passed that act. The last time there was any serious debate in Congress about energy was when, as I mentioned, the stimulus bill was up for consideration, and there was a debate about whether to include loan guarantees in there as part of the energy stimulus package. They ultimately were, but they actually haven't been used. And as you know, there's more reactors closing than opening, and there's, 4 under construction right now, Dan, down in, I guess George has got 2, and where's the other 2? South Carolina. So those communities support it. It's a huge construction project, lots of jobs, but the reasons why there's a lot of local support for that has as much to do with the capital investment and then what happens to boost the local economy in the construction phase as anything else. But having said all of that, the other issues that you face if you're going to do a siting of a reactor is enormous local community reaction. Where are you going to actually physically put the reactor? And this is where the Fukushima event, of course, it all started with 3 Mile Island, but with Fukushima and those reactors being designed very similar to like the reactor we have at Vermont Yankee, being a person in political office, I started hearing from folks. And I'm not talking about scientists. I'm just talking about moms and dads, parents, scared. And it's not like I have the credibility. I mean, I have no credibility, of course, as a congressman. But I have even less, if you can believe that, as an engineer, to be able to assure people that, hey, this is safe or it's not. I mean, people are nervous about it. And the fact that we've had these serious events, have had a real impact on the public acceptance that these are, quote, safe. So that is a real challenge for the industry. You know, the area where there continues to be some expenditure is on research. And in fact, I favor research. Congress is letting the scientific community down by not fully funding research in energy, in the NIH, in pure science. I mean, this is the future. But if there are opportunities out there that science with research could show are viable and safe, whether it's fusion or some other form of nuclear energy, you know, we want to find that out. It's in our interest to find that out. But those research budgets have been extremely generous in the past relative to other energy sectors like efficiency or renewable energy. But so far, we haven't had that breakthrough. So, you know, I think the question, Dan, you were asking me is where are we in Congress? And where I see us on nuclear energy, where we are on nuclear energy is that, in all candor, I don't see it as a real active and viable topic of debate at the moment. So it's that combination of things that are real challenges, the enormous capital cost, the permitting process that it was always tough, and it's getting tougher because the regulatory response to these events, like in Fukushima, is to go through A to Z about every step of the way when it comes to siting a nuclear reactor or reactors that are up and running, and micromanage and reinspect and reconsider every single thing that has to be done to try to give some peace of mind that these things are safe. That's expensive. You know, a lot of you might argue some of it is unnecessary, but there's a public demand out there based on people's apprehension that if something goes wrong when it's a nuclear reactor, that's a problem. So even if it's a micro, infinitesimal risk, if that risk happens actually to occur, then the consequences of that are catastrophic. So that is leading the regulators to regulate and regulate and regulate. So you get a lot of complaints from the nuclear industry that they're having these enormous costs that they have to bear in order just to stay in business. And again, I bring it back home to Entergy, where the main reason that they decided to discontinue operations was economic. You know, they were fighting the legal battle, they were fighting the political battle, but they came to their own ultimate conclusion that the economics weren't there for that to be a profitable thing for their shareholders. So these are, you know, and then the last thing that, you know, we haven't talked about, I'm sure you have here before I was here, but it's the storage problem. And, you know, there's no other, DuPont, no other industry has the government picking up the burden of solving an insoluble problem. You know, DuPont Chemical does a lot of stuff that is risky, okay, important, but risky. But they're the ones that have to figure out how to deal with the byproduct of those chemicals. They have to figure out how to treat them. They're regulated. They've got to get the job done. But the burden of risk is on the company. In the nuclear industry, the burden of risk, again, is on the taxpayer. And, you know, this has been going on for years and years. And the latest, you know, what's happened as a practical matter, and again, this is what the politicians know, is that everywhere there's a nuclear reactor, it has in fact become a long-term storage facility for nuclear waste. And there's nobody talking in Washington about some serious alternative proposal that has the prospect of being successful. I mean, you've got Senator Reid, who's in a pretty good position to make sure it doesn't go to Nevada. But there's a Senator Reid who's going to be there, whether Senator Reid is not, representing what the people in that district say about having something go there. And, you know, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has come up with what they're calling a consent-based approach, where the theory is you'll get people to discuss it and come together and agree on putting that nuclear waste somewhere. But, you know, that's, in my view, a pipe dream. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So there are just enormous challenges, you know, that I think have almost gotten to the point where the advocacy and energy in Congress, if you can put energy and Congress in the same word, is largely about more carbon fuels. And in my view, that's a mistake, because we should be doing much more on locally generated power. We should be doing much more on cogeneration. We should be doing much more on efficiency. And there's some promise in those areas, because Republicans and Democrats can agree. And it's important that we do. We just passed, as you mentioned, an energy bill that I sponsored with David McKinley from West Virginia, a coal state Republican, and this Ted Pope financing bill that, Dan, you've been so helpful on. I think we're going to get that passed. I just talked to John Podesta from the White House about it. So that's the area where there's some promise. But in nuclear, I'm not here as the engineer. I'm here just reporting on the state of play in Congress. And even the most vigorous advocates who believe that there is a way for nuclear to be safe, to be productive, who, if they were given their opportunity, would probably get rid of a lot of the regulations. That's not where they're putting their energies. So if I'm a power generator and I'm trying to figure out how to allocate my capital, and I'm looking at these public policies all being challenged, the taxpayer role in this being very substantial, the insoluble issue of waste storage, and then the competitive pressures of cheaper natural gas, it's going to make me pretty skeptical that this is a good game plan for my shareholders. So why don't I stop there, and we can open up for questions.
Peter, if I could
questions
start with
and
one.
comments. Go ahead.
And I think a theme this morning has been, can we meet our carbon-related challenges without nuclear? I think that's been a big element of this that we've grappled with this morning.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. But what I'm saying is that on a practical level, if you need the taxpayers to be involved and you need public policies in order to make it viable, then how much is it you're talking about? What's the price tag? You know, that's a question that the Tea Party folks, as well as folks who are really against nuclear, are fairly going to ask. What's the cost? You get your moment.
Congressman, how can you blame the nuclear industry for the fact that the taxpayers are on the hook for nuclear waste when it was the Congress that passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act in 1982 and declared a monopoly on waste services? No private industry can volunteer, and we'll get into that business because Congress declared a monopoly.
Well,
And forced
I don't know if you noticed.
to sign a contract.
I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not here to brag about Congress, okay?
There's
So-
also a sinking fund that I put money into for every kilowatt hour produced. To cover the
$34 billion has been put in that fund already.
That's right. And look, Congress has messed up a lot of things, and this may be one of them. But here's the bottom line right now for people in 2014 who serve in Congress who weren't there in 1982. What's the solution? What are we going to do? So historically, you probably have a good point. You know, I'm sure, the history of that much better than I do, quite sincerely. But we don't have an answer to the problem now. That's the issue. So that's a practical problem, even if we were, or Congress in 1982 was a major contributor to the problem. Yes, sir.
Peter, you mentioned Vermont efficiency utility, and megawatts is certainly one of the solutions to our problem generally. Can you talk just briefly about efficiency Vermont and how it's become a role model for the rest of the country?
Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. They think less is more. You know, the cheapest kilowatt produced is the one you save. And what they've done is gotten a lot of very good engineers and entrepreneurial spirit there. And they work with local businesses and homeowners with a lot of public policy support from Montpelier to go into businesses and do top to bottom review and make suggestions on what steps they can take in order to tighten up their operation and save on energy. So they've got competent people coming in. And I'll tell you, I go around a lot to businesses. One of the things I do is visit going concerns. And it's incredible how much I've come to appreciate the challenge of running a good business, making it work day in and day out, good quality service, good customer relations, good people. those businesses are cheap. They don't like to waste money. But they will pay for energy efficiency audits and then take the advice that they're getting and putting their money into it. They get some subsidies that help ease the way. But the best vote of confidence I've seen for the work of the energy efficiency utility is that the businesses that are really careful about their bottom line are spending money to do those things, and they're satisfied with the outcome. So again, there's enormous potential here. And again, there should be an all of the above approach on getting our carbon footprint down. But in my view, the first step, really, whatever the source of power, should be efficiency. Yes, ma'am.
In attributing the cost of various things and how it comes back to the taxpayer, whatever carbon-based, even though gas is better than oil or coal, you still need to add to that cost, the cost of rebuilding after the Katrinas, after the Sandys, after all that is coming to us, after putting a dike around Boston. Where are those missing costs? Those come back to the taxpayer. They need to be directly related to the carbon industries.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually favor a carbon tax. You know, if there's so many socialized costs. I mean, this is not just about nuclear now. It's a lot of activities have socialized costs that are outsourced. So that one of the earlier panelists talked about Florida, quote, self-insuring. They self-insure until they have a loss, and then it's time to go into your wallet. So you've got a very good point, but that's where, in a better, more functional Congress, frankly, we'd be having some serious discussions about how do you deal with that. And you'd be trying to make progress, not come up with the universal answer. This is the fuel that will do it or won't. But you're exactly right about that. Yes, sir.
May I ask you a question about the nuclear waste? The industry will argue that the dry cask storage options are there, and they have the able to guarantee safety for at least 80 years, if not longer. So in the immediate future, I think the problem is not that urgent. Of course, in the long run, still have to figure out the permanent repository site. And then my colleagues in New Mexico have been arguing that this WIPO project, waste isolation pilot program, that has been used to store a high risk waste, could be actually converted to a site for spent fuels from the industry. I don't know if that idea might sound feasible at all on the end.
Well, see, you'd know that better than me. I mean, the engineers would know it. What I'm talking about is the general public has lost confidence that being anywhere near nuclear waste is safe. Okay, I mean that's kind of what is a challenge, and then as a result of that, I think that's really what is why there's been no progress on Yucca Mountain. There's just a strong group. If it's anywhere near you, there's a lot of public opposition to it, and the science in that case is not persuasive to a lot of people who are really fearful about what can happen if something bad goes wrong. So that's how do you evaluate that? That's like, it's not a scientific thing. No matter how much you can prove it, if a person isn't ready to believe it, they're not going to. And I don't see out in the public much comfort and confidence. We've got dry cask storage down here. And actually, I was in the state senate, and I worked on the arrangement with Governor Douglas where we went for the storage pools to dry cask storage. And I got a lot of heat from a lot of folks down there because they didn't want to do anything that would, from their point of view, allow the energy to continue operating. But they had a license through a certain period of time, so I thought they were going to be able to continue doing that no matter what we did. And everything I heard from people, like in this room, was that dry cask storage was safer than the containment pools. So that to me made sense in terms of a safety issue for folks down there. But people in that area are not all that excited about having that dry cask facility on the banks of the Connecticut River for 80 years. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about viability insurance? Who do they buy it from? Who does the nuclear industry buy viability insurance governments, or?
I don't know how that works. Do you know how that works, Dan?
It's called the Price-Anderson Act, and
Oh, yeah,
it's
that's right.
an insurance fund that we all pay for as a result of our cap.
You
Yes,
buy commercial insurance up to the cap.
up to the cap, and then the government steps in above that cap.
Each utility steps in with $93 million per reactor to cover up to $13 billion before any taxpayer money goes.
Right, so it comes from two sources.
Yes, yes, sir. And then you, no, up here.
Can you give us a little bit of an update on progress of energy efficiency legislation going through the House and Senate? I mean, if you're in New Hampshire, one of the co-sponsors of the Senate version, there's been some speculation that perhaps your bill might be in trouble because of the recent challenge from Scott Brown. So, do you know what's going on?
Well, number one, Senator Shaheen is she's like the leader, okay? And I'm sponsoring her bill in the House. And she's like super close to getting this done. She's working with Rob Portman, also a Dartmouth grad, by the way. Right? He went to Dartmouth, didn't he? Classmate of yours?
Yes, class of 78.
All right. Well, I'm still for that bill, all right? But I think she's got a real shot at getting it through. Washington being Washington, now that she has a competitor with Scott Brown, is that a reason not to do something that makes sense to do, that's good for the economy, good for the environment? I don't think so, but I'm not joined by all my colleagues in that point of view. I mean, you saw House of Cards, right? Yeah, I mean, in that it's not exactly like Washington, but vengeance, retaliation. We don't kill people often, but some of those other things. But that is really important. And my hope is that'll pass. And I'll tell you why. We've got a companion bill in the House, and we've got a shot at getting that through. And I've been working very closely with Senator Shaheen. And she has been working really closely with with a lot of Republicans. They've got that 60-vote rule in the Senate. And they have another rule that's really even worse. If you want to make an amendment to a bill, it doesn't have to be related to the bill. So one of the problems we have in Washington is that instead of staying on the topic of energy efficiency, that can become a vehicle to advocate your view on Ukraine or on Keystone. And these will all be important issues that, merit debate and discussion. But should they really be attached to something that we all know needs to be acted on? And I also hope, what I see with what Senator Shaheen's doing and what I'm trying to do, and Senator Portman and some of my colleagues, we see this as an opportunity to do something that needs to be done that's good for your district and mine, but we also see it as so important as a vehicle to try to get Congress to work together on things that we agree on. I mean, this is not good for the country. I'm kidding a little bit about Congress, but it's not good for the country that this institution that belongs to you, okay, it's your Congress. Our job is to work for you. If it is dysfunctional, despite the best efforts of a lot of good people there, then that's bad for the country. Our job is to try to help you back home be successful in doing what it is you do best. So I see this as essential because it's good policy, but it will be a breakthrough in getting Republicans and Democrats to find common ground on important things. So go Senator Shaheen.
Just a quick point, do we have any indications that the 60-vote coalition that she's built up is holding together?
Yeah, she's got the votes. I think the biggest problem is that amendment issue that I mentioned, where it's 60 votes, but let's say there's a debate about Keystone, okay? Fair and square, probably different opinions in this room on that. But should we inject Keystone into the efficiency bill, where then the 65 votes that she may have, I'm making a number up now, is it 58 because a bunch of those can't go for something with Keystone? Have a separate vote on Keystone. Hold us accountable. Where do we stand? You for it or against it? And then I'm accountable. You can decide to vote for me or against me. But when you allow us in Congress by rules to basically sabotage any step forward, then we're just thwarting our own ability to do our responsibility to you.
All right, on that note, let's give Congressman Welch a big round of applause.